Welcome to dedoc. Welcome to the EASD dedoc Symposium. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you to EASD for having us, for inviting us. For the fourth time now, thank you to Chantal for making that possible again. Thank you very much. The dedoc Symposia have been going on since 2020. They always carry the same name, What We Wish You Knew and Why. So the idea is that we turn the direction 180 degrees and have the people living with diabetes, the lived experience, talk to the usual audience of conferences like these, meaning the HCPs, the researchers, the industry representatives. We are very glad to see that this is happening more and more, that lived experience, people living with chronic conditions are part more and more of regular conference streams. Here it is the norm. And we're looking forward to today's discussion. Before we dive into the subject matter, because we have a different subject every year, every conference, today we will be talking about diabetes and stigma from different perspectives. Before we go there, I want to quickly welcome the dedoc voices, and for those of you who do not yet know what this is, just say a very few words. The dedoc Voices Scholarship Program is by now the largest scholarship program in the world. We bring the lived experience, we bring people living with diabetes to conferences like EASD. And we have more than 20 dedoc voices, people living with diabetes, type 1, type 2, gestational, LADA, MODI, etc., here at EASD right now. And for a brief moment, I would like you all to get up, maybe turn around, because I see you're mostly in the front rows. Get up and wave so everybody can see you. We have another 20-some dedoc voices who have a virtual scholarship, so they are currently following this conference live on the virtual platform. And the symposium, and that is an exception to the usual rule, is also being live streamed on our website, on Facebook, and on YouTube. We do this whenever we hold a dedoc symposium so that the larger diabetes community can follow and can comment, and we will bring some of these comments in. In total here at EASD, we have 900 plus years of lived experience if we do the math. I know this is not quite appropriate, but I have to say this, we couldn't do this without the support of our partners and sponsors, so thank you to all the partners and sponsors supporting this program. dedoc is not a large entity. We do not receive any donations, any government grants, or any other sort of grant, by the way. It is entirely self-funded, and we couldn't do what we do without these friends and partners and sponsors who are supporting the program. So thank you. Just to give a little bit of background of what the dedoc Voices program in general has achieved since its launch in 2020. It was conceived in 2017-18, then started out in ATTD 2020, then had to go virtual throughout the years of the pandemic. We have been giving more than 400 scholarships to advocates from around the world. We have more than 200 individuals. The discrepancy shows you that many of them aim to come back, and that is perfectly fine with us because they learn, they grow, and they return. And we currently cover more than 50 countries across the globe. That is, it used to be primarily Europe. Now we have a very strong presence all over Africa, India, Pakistan, Australia, of course. And I know there is Australian guests following live right now, although it's in the middle of the night. What we wish you knew and why. These are the people who will be talking, and I will stop. Chantal Mathieu, president of EASD, is so kind, as she has been over the last 3 editions, to give a few words of welcome and talk in most of your language why it is important to bring the lived experience to scientific conferences. And then we will have Chelcie Rice from the United States, who will be talking about stigma at work and in social media. Helga from South Africa will be talking about, the title is This is Normal, and you will be talking about how it is in South Africa also from the type 2 perspective. And then we have Santiago Paulós from Uruguay, who currently lives in Scotland, and he will be just talking about addressing stigma by connecting art and diabetes, and we really look forward to that. And then Renza, of course, will once again introduce the EndDiabetesStigma campaign and co-chair or facilitate the panel discussion, while we are also looking for questions from the audience, that is you, and from the audience in the virtual space. With that, Chantal, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming. I know you may not be able to stay for the whole presentations, but thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bastian, and welcome to this symposium by the dedoc community, by the dedoc voices. I see Professor Tadej Battelino in the audience, the President-elect of IDF Europe. I see Bart Torbijns, the Managing Director of the European Diabetes Forum. And these entities have been classically associated with the voice of those living with diabetes. I mean, IDF has a long history as the Federation of All Diabetes Associations to really help put diabetes on the policy agenda. IDF Europe alone, unfortunately, is not strong enough. I mean, there's a lot of wind blowing in our face. And a couple of years ago, ESD's president, then Julian Zierat, said, we need to come together. We need to harmonize our voices, namely IDF Europe, ESD, EFSD, ISPAT, SFD, JDRF, more partners. We all need to harmonize our voices because that's the only way we will be able to put diabetes on the policy agenda. And so today you will agree with me that we have been extremely successful as the European Diabetes Forum under leadership of Bart Torbijns to really put diabetes on the policy agenda. But what my learning from that is that indeed we need to amplify our voices and we need to be clever and all work together. And so when you say the sponsors of the dedoc community are pharma and medtech, to me it's natural that also industry are stakeholders in everything. But the most important stakeholder are the people living with the disease. And so I think it's normal, it's natural that we say people living with the disease are a voice that needs to be heard when it comes to policy. IDF has shown us, EUDF has shown us. But what Bastian, me, and others thought was also crucial is that the voice of those living with the disease is also heard by researchers. And let me tell you, this is not a given. And so when many, many years ago, we started introducing patient advisory committees in research programs of IMI, the Innovative Medicines Initiative, we as Inodia were the first program to introduce a PAC, Patient Advisory Committee. They all declared us crazy. What can patients tell me as a beta cell physiologist? What can patients tell me as an immune researcher? Let me tell you, bringing in the voice of those living with the disease in research programs was the best thing ever. And so IMI has now created their own patient advisory committee. And now it is natural that people living with diabetes are involved in research programs from the beginning. Your voices are needed to guide researchers, not on which enzyme to use to study I don't know what, but to think about the relevance of their research. You need to ask the question, what does your research mean? Bastian knows what I will say. When we started with the Patient Advisory Committee and people with diabetes said, what does your research mean? The researchers understood, oh, I need to put it in lay language, okay, you know, it's an enzyme binding and it's a peptide. No, 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 no. What does your research mean to me as a person living with diabetes? What will it change? What is the impact of your research? And so this question, what does your research mean, is what you need to ask. to researchers. And that is why we bring the dedoc voices and other people living with diabetes to a conference like the European Association for the Study of Diabetes. You need to go out there to all the short presentations. You need to ask the question to all the researchers, basic and clinical. What does your research mean to me? And when they start explaining in lay language, you say, yes, that's fine. But what does it mean? How will this change the needle? How will it push what we are doing for diabetes? Because that's where all of us stakeholders are together. To fight diabetes, to eventually prevent diabetes, cure diabetes, and first of all, where we still have to live with this disease that is diabetes and the stigma of diabetes. And so, dear friends, I wish you all the best with this symposium, and I pledge you, you will be part of ESD for the next years. You have to be here. So welcome in ESD, and you know, ask your critical questions. What does it mean to me? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantal. And Chantal will stay for a while, but being the president of this association, I understand that, and I hope you will all understand that she might have to run later. That being said, thank you for these words of welcome. Thank you for acknowledging the importance of bringing the voice of people living with diabetes, and that's what we're going to do now with a focus on stigma, living with stigma in diabetes. And our first speaker is Chelcie Rice from the United States. Chelcie, you're a stand-up comedian, so we look forward to how you're going to bring this on.
Thank you very much. Thank you so very much. And first of all, I'd like to thank ESD as well as my dedoc family, because you are now my family now. You are not my friends. You are now my family. You have invited me, this is my third time? Got it. You have invited me like 3 times to represent you, and it's been an honor and a pleasure to do so. First of all, coming to Hamburg as an American, I know there is a little bit of stigma I bring as an American. So first of all, I'd like to clear the air. Anything you have seen on the news about the United States, I had nothing to do with it. As Bastian stated, I am a stand-up comedian, not by trade, but just something that I've done. I've used comedy as a way to educate and inform masses about my condition, living with diabetes. I've lived with diabetes for over 30 years now. I was diagnosed back in the 80s, which sounds funny in itself. There were no pumps, there were no CGMs, anything of that nature. I wasn't quite as distant as it was someone being diagnosed, say, in the 50s, but I didn't get introduced to a diabetes online community until social media came along, like, say, Facebook. And that's how I grew to become connected with dedoc and many other organizations that are out there supporting people like myself who live with this chronic illness and who actually want to see a change. For me, becoming an advocate, I feel duty-bound to be an advocate, because it would make no sense for me to live with this condition for over 30 years and not do something to help someone that looks like me or lives like me. So that is why I stand here today, because funny as I'd like to be, the seriousness of it is there was a reason I have been given this condition. There was a reason that I had lost vision in my right eye, because apparently it has been placed upon me to do my best, to do my due diligence to help those who live with the same condition as I do. So that's why I stand here. The discussion today, for my portion, is what we want to talk about. I want to start with, I guess, my story of living with diabetes and dealing with diabetes stigma in the workplace. Now, when I was first diagnosed, I knew nothing about diabetes. Then, once I started living with it more and more, I had to bring my diabetes into the workplace. And that's where what I like to call the generational stigma of diabetes. the misinformation from people who look like me, people, African Americans who grew up not taking their diabetes seriously because they were never treated seriously when they were told they had it. Fun fact is, there was a time when African Americans or African slaves were not thought to be able to develop diabetes. They thought that diabetes was more for an affluent race of people, that black people were somewhat too jovial, too loose to get diabetes, which is astounding to me because I don't know how jovial and happy you would be after picking 500 pounds of cotton. But exactly. So through that lineage of misinformation and misdiagnosis, that's how much of it, in my opinion, that it came to pass that black people didn't really take diabetes seriously because nobody told them it was serious. Oh, you'll just live with it. I had a woman tell me once that, well, God placed it on me, so I just have to live with it. So when you bring that into the workplace, you bring that load of, okay, do I tell somebody about my condition? What I experienced was the ideas or the loose thought process of, well, he can't do this and he can't do that, and why are you taking a break, and why are you shooting? Are you on heroin when you shoot yourself like that? This is all the stuff that gets tossed around. And at the time, I didn't really think of it as like just stigma. I thought these people were just stupid. That's the only thing I could come up with. The quick and easy way out. They're just idiots. I'm just going to go on about my day. But I didn't realize the fact that this was all stigma that's been brought down through generations of misinformation. Families telling other family members that they shouldn't take it so seriously, or there's nothing you can do about it. Just go and listen to the doctor and let the doctor tell you. Meanwhile, sometimes the doctor will just might misdiagnose you or just give you a medication and tell you to go do that. Because here's something that a lot of people don't seem to understand about in lower income communities, at least in the United States, healthcare professionals are seen as a level of authority, the same way they view the police. What he says goes. If he gives you a prescription, you do that and you do what he says, no questions asked. And so when you're left with that type of mindset, you just think, well, I don't want nobody to know about it because I'm ashamed of it. I might share it with my family members, but the last thing I want to do is share it at work, because at work, they're going to judge you. They're going to oftentimes judge whether you actually be able to do the work or not. Now, here's an example of what I'm dealing with on my job today. About a month or so ago, we were in our team meeting, and we had a guest of another team leader in my meeting who was just see our meeting and see what it was about. So we were doing mock interviews, and I was sitting down being the actual interviewer or interviewee. And the question came up about, well, how did you handle challenges of handling one tough project and on another tough project at the same time? How do you go about handling that? So I brought up the fact that, well, I live with a chronic illness, and so I have to balance that and work at the same time. I have to be able to manage my blood sugar, because if my blood sugar starts to drop, I can't work properly. I'm going to start forgetting things, dropping things of that nature, and I won't be able to finish the project. So being able to balance those two, that to me is a challenge that I've succeeded at many times. Now, this guest team leader that was in the room with us, she basically just came back with her, with her comments about what I had said. And she said, well, I wouldn't bring up the fact if you had a chronic illness because, they might not give you the position. Now, I've been an advocate for quite some time. I knew that she was way off base. And my team leader was like, he was acting like a referee, like, hold it, because he saw her heading towards a lawsuit brick wall. So he had to jump in and just basically let her know, well, there's other ways of saying that, you have to. But this is the thing that we deal with on my job. I have an associate who works in another location in another state. I haven't heard from her in a month. The last time I heard from her, she was having problems managing her diabetes at work and managing her relationship with her team leader, because her team leader wasn't giving her the proper time to manage her diabetes. And like I said, she's been out of work on leave for like over a month. I don't know what's going on with her. I haven't heard. Whether she's been hospitalized, whether she had DKA, I don't know. But I do know they make us jump through a lot of hoops to be a person living with a person with diabetes at work. Here's what I have to do managing my diabetes at my job. Let's say, for instance, I'm doing the work, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden I have a low, and I have to go treat my low. What I have to do, I have to log out, stop, just clock out, go manage my diabetes, then go back and finish the day. But I have to work over the time that I had to clock out just to manage my diabetes. Now, are you helping me or what? Does that sound like I'm being treated fair? Basically, they're getting over on me. As long as they got theirs, as long as they get what they need out of me, then they're happy. The diabetes thing, that's my problem. Now me, I'm a bit of a tough cookie. I'm a bit hard-headed. I'm from the South, so I can take it on the chin. But for someone else who doesn't really have my hard-headedness, that might make them feel very unwelcomed at work and unsafe at work. Key word is unsafe. I don't like people being made to feel unsafe at work. You're supposed to be safe at work, especially when you're living with a chronic illness. Why would I have to deny myself the ability to take care of myself just so you can make your bottom line? It's just not fair. But this is the things that we have to live with. So I say that to illustrate that, yeah, we know life is unfair, but the work doesn't have to be unfair. You don't have to treat me unfairly. Anytime I meet someone at work that has diabetes, the first thing I talk about is like, well, what are you dealing with right now? Are they helping you out at all? Because that's just me. I'm an instigator. I like to disrupt things. I'll flip a table if need be, because that's just the way I am. And they've gotten to know that at work. They created what they call an employee resources group, where they're supposed to support other employees who live with chronic illnesses. But in fact, what all they're doing is just making spaces for us to talk about our problems and this, that, and the other, but not really addressing the serious issues. But you can rest assured I'll be the one to ask those serious issues, because that's the kind of guy I am. So that's my story of stigma in the workplace. Stigma, as it pertains to just about any chronic illness, honestly, is so deep-rooted in our society, and global society for that matter. It has a deep, dark history. I mean, it's almost like we have to find something else to find a stigma about. Look at it now. We have to stigmatize COVID. If you didn't get the vaccination, oh, you're one of them. If you didn't get the vaccination, oh, you're one of them. And so it's almost like we have to continually find something else to stigmatize. So is there a solution? I think so. We just basically have to work together. We have to start to thin that line between the healthcare professionals and the advocates and the patients, just like what we're doing here now. There was a time we wouldn't be here as patients, but now we're here. So that line is starting to get blurred a little bit. We're starting to work together, and that's what I'm liking right now. I love the fact that I'm here, that I can actually talk about this and bring light to this, the stigma that's basically, that I'm dealing with in my life. So the next thing I want to talk about was stigma in social media. Social media is a quagmire in itself, and I think we can all agree to that. And stigma, as it pertains to diabetes, it's one thing when you're dealing with just word of mouth type stigma, things that other people believe, things that don't believe based on misinformation or no education at all. But when you just put a phone in someone's hand with some graphic skills or just ability to use an app to make a meme about something you know absolutely nothing about, you basically end up with stuff like this. Where is it? Is that showing? Yeah, anybody remember this? When Starbucks came out with this unicorn frappe, then it just like a snowball effect of all the dumb jokes. That's what you get when you put ignorance, you take ignorance and a smartphone, and that's what you get. You may as well give it to a chimpanzee, you know, and so that's what you get when you come up with stuff like this. Has one sip of unicorn frap, gets diabetes. Har-dee-har, right? Now take for a minute, now how would that make a child feel, a child with diabetes, how would that make them feel? Now, mind you, I didn't make these. I just went online and pulled these. This was from like maybe what we say like 2016, 2017, I think. Stuff's getting pushed around. This was one that, that really caused an uproar. I don't know if anybody remembers this or not. I don't know if you can read it in the back. It says, for that special uncontrolled diabetic in your life. These were the toe shoes, the running shoes, and obviously the toes are missing. Here's the kicker. This particular meme was posted by a doctor. Mind you, he's one of those YouTube doctors, but he's got a degree nonetheless. And so he thought that was funny, and he got roasted royally on social media. He didn't apologize, but he did take it down and didn't accept the fact that, you know, a lot of people didn't like it. I don't know if that's really an apology or not. But, and there's a flip side to this negative imagery you see on social media. There's also the fact that the positive imagery that a lot of, say, advocates put online can have a different effect on people who don't have access to things such as CGMs or particular insulins that they can't afford because they don't have the proper insurance. As advocates, we have to be mindful of the folks who are looking at what we post. In the same frame as all the dancing in TikTok videos, what the kids are putting out now, how that affects kids that don't have access to these things. You have to be mindful of what you put out. Simply mindful. Think about how you would feel if you couldn't afford that. You realize that back during COVID, when kids weren't able to go to school, there were poor kids in the United States who couldn't afford Wi-Fi, so they had to drive down to the local McDonald's and park in the parking lot and use the free Wi-Fi. They can see these things, so you have to be mindful of what you're putting out there. Be truthful about the fact that you're grateful that you have access to these things, but be mindful of the fact that there's somebody out there that doesn't. Now, I'm not, like my father used to say, I'm not preaching, I'm just telling you what I know. Wrap it up? Thanks for that bell, I like that. That was a cool thing. I usually don't get that. I usually get like a bright light in the face. But yeah, to get out of here, I appreciate the opportunity, but like I said, be mindful of what you're doing. Be mindful of what you're posting. And in the workplace, be diligent, do your due diligence, ask questions, and stand up for yourself. Thank you.
Chelcie Rice, everybody. Thank you very much. We're already getting first comments on social media. Do you want to jump in?
No, let's keep going. I was just going to say, can we just move off that slide? Thank you.
Yeah, very well. It's done. It's done.
That's better.
So we're already getting questions on social media. I'm sure you have questions. We have decided to go through the presentations, and then we'll have a panel discussion and questions from the audience here and the online audience. So with that, Helga, over to you. Stigma, this is normal in South Africa from the type 2 perspective. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I kind of feel a bit starstruck. I feel like I'm in the presence of royalty in some regards. Do you want me to bring that over? Thank you. They say we haven't arrived until our voices are heard. 12 years of silence and orphaning my diabetes. It's taken me that long to find my voice. It's taken me that long to find agency and show up for you today. I've been living with diabetes for approximately 15 years. And I say approximately because of what I know now and my medical history. It's likely that I've been most probably living with diabetes for far longer than I was aware. It's really important for me to not diminish my own lived experience with you today, but it would be totally remiss of me not to acknowledge, as a South African, I'm standing with you having great privilege and accessibility to private medical care. The ironic thing about all of this is that I have not been immunized against stigma and discrimination and the impact on my mental well-being. My journey began back in 2006. I was pregnant. During my 3rd trimester of pregnancy, I had a gynecologist visit, and I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes. I don't remember my diaversary. I only remember a couple of things. One, very technical medical clinical terms, and secondly, I sneaked a peek at the note that was given to me by the physician at the time. I was referred to as geriatric. I was referred to as obese. And I was referred to, which I had no clue at the time what it was, that I had metabolic disease. This was a note that was referring to the dietitian at the time. What proceeded was a series of tests and consultations, and even a barefoot run on a treadmill with my bouncing belly. And all I could think about at the time was, this was not the plan. This was not the plan. I read so many magazines, the imaging, so many conversations with the aunties and my mum and my cousins and my friends. I had done everything that they told me to do. But these were not the stories regaled to me at the time. It was emotional and it was confusing for me. I was fearful, and despite having the best medical care, I felt deeply ashamed and guilty. I'd let myself down, and importantly, I'd put my unborn baby at risk. This was my fault. It didn't occur to me, only preparing it occurred to me, and it didn't occur to me at the time, but not at any stage, and maybe unintentionally, none of my physicians or doctors or specialists sat me down and said, Helga, let's check in. How are you doing? What's happening in your heart? What's happening in your head? I chose to tell no one. 5 people knew about my diagnosis at the time. There was much anxiety, stress, fear, and tears. I can't tell you how many tears there were at the time. But I was determined, and I was determined I would do everything to keep my baby safe. And importantly, I was going to show up a glowing picture of maternal bliss. Because this was normal, right? I followed a strict eating plan, numerous doctor's visits, taking the prescribed insulin. My Daniel Reed was born at a solid just under 5 kilograms. It was absolute joy, it was euphoria. But you know what? It was the relief that I had escaped the critical scrutiny of gestational diabetes. My A1C normalized, life was great. But unbeknown to me, statistically, I would not beat the odds. 5 years later came my annus horribilis. My dear mother's life was tragically taken, and I received my second diagnosis of diabetes, this time non-insulin taking type 2. At the same time, I was diagnosed with depression as a result of the trauma of my mom's untimely passing. It felt as if my heart and my body broke into a million pieces all at the same time. But again, I told no one. For the next 5 years, my diversion was to overfunction in my personal and my professional life. In the mirror in the morning, like many of the motivational speakers, I high-fived myself. You got this. Because this is what normal looked like. My personal, social, and professional ecosystems reflected the narrative that type 2 diabetes is self-inflicted. And so all I was hearing in the midst of this context were the jokes that Chelcie spoke about, the conversations about fat phobia, laziness, and people just not wanting to do anything about it. And my favorite was always the eye rolling that would happen when trying to demystify a misinformed conversation. In my world, stigma was alive, or is alive, and kicking. Self-managing in silence was exhausting, but being normal is how I kept myself safe from judgment. As I struggled alone with my diabetes, my time in range, maintaining a healthy weight, I blamed myself for not being disciplined enough, not being enough. In 2017, things changed for me. Fundamentally, it changed the trajectory of what you're seeing today. I embarked on a coaching certification, particularly focused on integral methodologies, that was really life-changing for me. My physician at the time, endocrinologist, asked me to speak at the World Diabetes Day Forum. And on the 14th of November 2017, I stood up in a room full of more than 50 medical practitioners, specialists, and physicians, and patients, and disclosed that I was a person living with diabetes. And since then, my life and I actually look very different. It's been a very slow, determined, and liberating but humbling journey that has changed my relationship with diabetes, my emotional and my physical well-being. It has led me to a path working with people, coaching them who have been diagnosed with diabetes, and seeking the integral and integrated approach to their well-being. It has led to advocacy. And importantly, it has led me to community and viewing my life with diabetes through a widened lens, which has really great possibility. So here's the things that I know for sure right now. There's no fault in living with diabetes. Self-acceptance has been instrumental in my progress. Support doesn't necessarily come from our own ecosystems, whether that be socially or professionally. And that is why the people you see sitting in front here, peer and community support, are essential to our well-being. It is the feeling for us to feel emotionally safe, to be heard and to be understood with no judgment that remains essentially important. This is why I'm standing here today. And in my daily life and in my ecosystems, this is why I cannot be quiet any longer. And this is why I want to change the narrative. Thank you so much.
Helga Nefdt from South Africa. Helga, thank you very much for finding your voice, even if it took that long. This is very important. Again, we're getting comments on social media. I think there is hundreds of thousands that will relate to what you call normal, which means trying to be normal, not telling anyone. This is what most people, especially with type 2, do these days, no matter where they are in the world. And it is so important that people like you get up here and change that paradigm to overcome not only the stigma, but everything, the conversation around it. Thank you for finding your voice. With that, Santiago, looking forward to your approach towards diabetes and stigma. Santiago is known as the diabetic survivor on social media, especially on Instagram. He has some great good examples of how social media and art can be used to overcome and to address diabetes stigma and other things. And we look forward to hearing about it and seeing some of it, Santiago.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, so I will keep it short and sweet. So how this works? Oh, yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about addressing stigma by connecting art and diabetes. So actually, before arriving to Hamburg, I was in a birthday party, and this like normal location where you're like seated next to each other that you don't know. you're having a good time, you're eating, you know, conversations like what you do for a living, what's your age, this stuff. But suddenly, there was an inflecting point in the conversation where I say, oh, wow, you know, I do have diabetes. I have diabetes type 1. And the first reaction of this person was like, oh, wow, you look normal to me. And I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting, your reaction. I thought, you know, I was normal as well. So with this in mind, I'm a person that, as you can see, I like to do images, not so much to speak about it. I'm going to introduce myself through images, which hopefully will address how stigma could be addressed through art connected with diabetes. So between highs and lows, I doodle. Sometimes people say I look like a normal person. Sometimes people say I'm a bit strange. But I don't mind, and I keep doodling. No comments. So I think that art or anything visual could really open up the conversation around many of the issues around stigma. This is an example of that. So you will see I'm going to be touching certain things in a light-hearted fashion, which I think is something super helpful for people in our diabetes community, but also for the wider audience to create empathy. This is another example, maybe speaking about mental health, or maybe addressing how insulin vials, actually, we do know this is a hormone, how could affect our feelings or our mood. Speaking about technology, or those awkward moments where things just doesn't work. Maybe to be conscious about our own identity and how diabetes, even the word, is so ingrained in ourselves. Relentlessness, oh, that was a strange word. 24 hours, 7 days, all the things we know. Also, I thought to bring this example of how to bring these images from the digital realm. Chelcie touched about social media, but also what will happen when we move these images to the physical world. You know? So this was my idea to have a break from when I go to the beach, to try to explain to everybody what is a pump, or what is like the marks on top of my body, or the diabetic tan lines. This is, well, some picture people sent to me. Also, art can educate, no? So definitely, there's something related with raising diabetes awareness and education. Could be something quite literal, and trying to talk about it and how we feel. Could be data. We know this number very well, no? 180 decisions every day. It also helps to change the narrative, you know, trying to shift what's the narrative we have around diabetes, and also maybe to take the power back to people with diabetes. You know? I think we should be the ones who should be helping to develop that narrative. Whoop. This is a good example of that. It's touching on many points. I will leave to you to. The idea of this artwork is more to open questions rather than a straight message. Feelings. Bouncy sugars, why not? Maybe a dialogue between a pancreas and an insulin vial. I think this is quite self-explaining. Or what about commenting on the news or relating the things? By the way, this is not out. It's not very up to date. As you know, Bitcoin is not doing well. And most importantly, I think the most important thing that it creates is community, you know? So this is something that, of course, all advocacy does, but I think that images could create this sense of community. You can find your people, but this will, therefore, will lead to empathy, and empathy will help, or it helps, actually, to remove stigma. Sorry, people I put here, probably here in this room. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Santiago, I love it. I love how you always bring this fun approach to things that for many of us are very, very serious, but you always find a tweak to it, and we've been talking about you maybe supporting our work as well by doing that on a more regular level, but it is so much fun to see all this.
You didn't know that. He's just finding that out now.
No,
Anyway,
we talked about this last year. Anyways, we just didn't get around to implementing it. Before we get to the discussion, I know I already said that here, Renza is going to talk about the EndDiabetesStigma campaign, and then we're going to come to your questions, comments, etc. So feel free and ready to come to the microphones, please.
We really do want as many questions as possible because, as you can see, we've got 3 remarkable speakers here, and I'm going to be very, very quick because we did have a session earlier today. We're about solutions here. Stigma is a significant problem in the diabetes community, and I think that if you were to speak to any of our dedoc voices here, they would have stories of stigma that they could share that would eloquently get across just how impactful it is, how harmful it is into everyday life living with diabetes. I have hours of stories and I feel like I need some therapy, but again, I'm not going to spend this whole time actually using you all to have that session. But as I said, we're about solutions, and if you were in the session earlier today, you would have heard about the pledge to end diabetes stigma. And I would really encourage anyone who has not already signed it to please go to, you can do it while you're sitting here right now, EndDiabetesStigma.org, and to please sign the pledge. We currently have close to 2,000 individuals and over 200 organisations, and they're not only organisations or people in the diabetes community, they're also beyond our own ecosystem, who are signing this and making a meaningful pledge and commitment to saying enough is enough, because it is. Stigma is harmful, nothing good comes from stigma, and it goes a long way to actually making life with diabetes more difficult than it already is. It's already a tough gig living with diabetes. The pledge is part of a larger project, which is an international consensus statement that will be launched on 14th of November. Fingers and everything crossed, because I just realised it's only 5 weeks away. And that was brought together by 51 experts from 18 countries across the globe that has looked at the evidence. And this is actually, again, we're building a resource kit, I guess, if you like, about pointing out why stigma is so harmful. This is a slow burn, and the example that I gave earlier today, when somebody said, is this actually going to do anything? Is it just a bit of tokenism? And there is so much tokenism in diabetes. Good things take time, and I aligned it to the Language Matters movement, which 10 years ago you would never have heard somebody standing on a conference talking about language, but now it is very, very much front of most people's minds in the diabetes world. We're so grateful to the people who are here. You are our allies. Thank you so much for being part of, this conversation and really endeavouring to address stigma, to end diabetes stigma. Keep going, keep pushing it out beyond these walls. But now let's use the fact that we've got 3 remarkable advocates here, and Bastian, who is also going to be part of this conversation, to answer any questions that you might have. I've got a lot of questions, so I can just do this on my own, but I really would love to hear any comments or questions from the audience. Our dedoc voices, please feel free to come to the microphone and share your own experiences. Of course, I would just ask that we keep comments and questions really short so that we can have a discussion and really hear from our advocates. But I was about to start, but Eritrea, I told you I was going to call on you, and you've made it super easy for me to do that. Tell everybody who you are, where you're from, and please ask your question.
Well, Renza, I've got you. Oh, geez, what is happening? Sorry about the feedback. I'm Eritrea Musa. I work over at the Diatribe Foundation as social media manager. I was lucky to be a dedoc voice at ISPAD. I think it was 2 years ago. That's where I met Santiago. And I also host a podcast and produce Diabetics Doing Things. Check us out. We are online. Thank you so much to our 3 voices. I feel so lucky to know all 3 of you. Some of us are very close. I know Chelcie and I have a great relationship, and I kind of want to ask some questions that I think other people might be afraid to, but I'm not.
Hang on, before you ask the question though, quickly give a plug for Destigmatize.
Oh yeah, of course. Well, our wonderful program manager, Mathieu is here. If you're interested in Destigmatize, Diatribe has committed to ending diabetes stigma. We have signed the pledge, so has Diabetics Doing Things. And we're very excited to be a part to help ending the stigma around diabetes, whatever type that you might have. So definitely check out destigmatize.org and come talk to Mathieu, who would love to talk to all of you in this room. Thanks for the reminder. I'm actually going to start with Chelcie. So as an American person myself, who has talked to you so many times, do you have any advice for any other people in the American workplace or in a European workplace who might be facing diabetes stigma and might not know what to do?
Yeah, definitely do what I did. Once I got introduced to the diabetes online community, I used that resource endlessly because all it came down to was just meeting other people who were living with the same thing that I was. I think one of the things that's really important if you're either newly diagnosed or been diagnosed and haven't really taken opportunities to find a tribe or a community is use them as support. Because like I said, when I was diagnosed, I didn't have that. I just had like these word of mouth groups that made me, and when I would go there, I was 25 and everybody else in the room was like in their 60s. So I didn't fit in. So I didn't find that until well into the mid 2000s, and then I started to meet new people, and then I started learning about all these different technologies. I would encourage, especially young people that are in college, to start building those communities on campus, because being there on campus thinking that you're alone with a condition like that, you really need community like that. So that would be one of the biggest things I would do, is don't just use that phone for games and using your social media. Use the social media for something good and find your community.
I think that's really great advice. Thank you for that. Helga, as a South African person and as a woman of color living with diabetes, thinking back on the story that you told, and also thank you so much for that vulnerability. I think we all in the room felt it when you were sharing. Is there something that really stopped you from sharing your story with people before the 12 years went by? Those 5 people that you told, was there a bad reaction? Was there a reason other than just what the personal narrative that was happening in your mind?
Helga, hold on to your answer for a moment. I'm sorry, Eritrea, I hope you've got more questions, but you're going to have to ask them for a different microphone. This microphone here is not working, so if people do have questions, there's one over there, and one in the middle down the back. But Eritrea's question was, as a woman with diabetes, could you please share more about your experiences and about the 5 people that she told initially and beyond that? So thank you.
Thanks for the question. Can you hear me? And thanks for acknowledging that. I think that, the South African context, Sebastian said, oh, Helga's speaking about the South African context, and I'm going, whoa, that's huge. But it was actually just around the lived experience. And I think it's really important to emphasize again, in the South African context, in the African context, we deal with exclusion, diversity, equity, and many other socioeconomic issues that create much greater challenges for us and complexity in terms of us being able to deal with diabetes, not only on an individual level, but we can also talk about it on a policy level, legislative level, socioeconomic level. But back to the question that I was asked. The 5 people, it was me that obviously knew about it. It was Daniel Reed's dad. It was my gynecologist, dietitian, and endocrinologist. Those were the 5 people. Why, retrospectively, why didn't I speak about it? Because I was morbidly obese at the time. When I spoke about overfunctioning, control has got a big thing to do with it. You hold some kind of, I think as a Black South African woman, you end up needing to overfunction in many respects. And our health and our well-being, and I think culturally, we are expected to lead in our ecosystems, in our lives in a particular way. And certainly, generationally, in my family, I come from a legacy of exceptionally strong Black women. where we straighten the tablecloth, we put on our red lips, and we only have polite conversation. And so speaking about even women's health in a particular way, menopause and diabetes as an example, grief as a woman and how it impacts on our health and our mental well-being. These are not conversations that we have openly, or it wasn't. And so I think because of that, a lot of that, I felt that the only thing I had was to show up totally A-type, functioning as best in the narrative of perfection. And so therefore I didn't speak about it. Because my diabetes is the only thing that I couldn't. I could go and stand and do a degree and pass, cum laude, done. I could have an executive position, tick. I could be the best wife, Martha Stewart. You'd get that reference, tick. Well, not quite. I mean, maybe a bad reference, but tick. You know, I could be the best friend, but I couldn't get my time in range. I couldn't lose the weight. And so these issues, I think, are all really complicated. And I think finding those pockets of, Renza and I spoke a year ago on, I think, sound.
Yeah.
And it was, I mentioned safe spaces, and I think you spoke about it again. We don't have sufficient spaces where we create agency for everybody to be able to speak openly in this way. Because it's hard, you know? I hope that addresses the question.
It does. Thank you so much for that answer. I think that it's important that we all note that women have been conditioned to check boxes and not be uncomfortable, but well-behaved women have never made history. So Helga, I hope you're in that list of women who are going to make history. My last question is for Santiago, my good friend Santiago. Okay. You bring a lightheartedness and a humor to your content. You're a great content creator. I love consuming your content. But sometimes I wonder that as a man, do you feel that it has to be lighthearted to get across? Are there any topics that you wish you could further dive into but are too heavy sometimes for you?
That's a very good question, actually. Yeah, I don't really know, to be honest. I mean, I always had, when I started like the social media channel, everybody told me, hey, that's not you, you know? And so I wonder if there's an element of that, for sure. I think my personal story is quite about self-stigma, I think. I think that's something that was quite built inside myself and has been like a battle all the time. So I'm not sure if I have an answer for that question, but I would say I'm touching the things I want for now, yes.
Thank you for that answer. And I'm passing the mic. I'm so sorry for taking up so much time.
No, thank you. We have got some more questions, but I just will read a comment that's come in. There are people watching because this is live streamed. So we have a comment from Belinda, who is a health professional in Australia. Thanks for watching us, Belinda. Hello. I think health professionals supporting people with diabetes need to do more to help people with diabetes identify their own internal capabilities so they can develop the emotional and social intelligence so they feel equipped and confident to stand up and speak up as well. So I guess that's something for health professionals to consider in their practice. But thank you. We've got a next question. Please tell us where you're from and ask your question and who it's directed to.
Hi, I'm Peter Senior. I'm a diabetes doctor in Canada. You all, I think, have demonstrated the power of community, and I think it's true for all of us as human beings. But my question maybe to all of you is, are there any suggestions for how healthcare professionals can help get their patients connected? I often feel my patients are really alone and unconnected, and that's really a barrier to them, I think, moving on. But I'm not always sure what the best direction to point them in. But there's also that readiness, and again, for many it will take time before they're ready to reach out. But any tips or suggestions for providers like me?
Yeah, good. I think I would say that nowadays the internet, social media is like a good starting place. And I think that, I mean, me personally, the first person I met with diabetes was after, I don't know, probably more than 20 years since I was diagnosed. So my point is that also it's a personal option of decision, more like if you would like to meet other people with diabetes, if that makes sense. But I think it's quite important to have that option, So, yes.
To be honest with you, you're standing in a room full of resources right here. All you have to do is take down these Twitter handles, these websites, all these different advocates who have abilities to reach out and use things such as social media or the internet to provide support to your patients. That's basically kind of what we've been asking many health professionals to do, is like, you got questions, you want to hook up your patients, here we are, that type of thing. Yeah, and social media can be like a minefield, because there are a lot of groups on, say, for instance, Facebook, who made up of people who live with diabetes who actually post the types of images that I was showing previously. So, like I said, social media can be a landmine or minefield. But like I said, I would just utilize the resources that you're in the room with right now, because there's some fantastic voices here.
Send people to dedoc, dedoc.org. It's a really, really good starting place. And I'm not saying that because, I want to get in a free plug while I'm standing here holding a microphone. But really, there are people from around the world. It's a way that you can connect with people locally, but also internationally.
Mm. So I think, I love the question, because I think, well, maybe not the most popular opinion, but I do want to acknowledge that, we've had this discussion amongst ourselves about that our endocrinologists, our physicians, our doctors don't have the time to sit with us in consultation to discuss the heart issues and how we are feeling emotionally, etc. And I think there is an opportunity and a space to expand practice that involves other therapeutic practices, and not necessarily psychological support through psychologists, etc., but perhaps a coaching approach that would be helpful, because I am not going to post-diagnosis step out of a consultation and go onto Instagram and social media and go and check out where my community is. I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to necessarily speak about it to anybody. So I think there is opportunity for consideration and reflection of how can one expand your practice to include other support. And it's about the sausage machine of going diagnosis, dietitian. You need to get your self-management correct first before you can even think about community. So I think there is an opportunity in that, if that makes sense, to expand that, and that's the first point in terms of providing that emotional support for the individual in a private way before they are able to go into the public social space to be able to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed. We do have some more questions down the back, but firstly I'll just read this from Nikki, who is following along from the UK. She is a former dedoc voice. Thanks so much for your comments here, Nikki. People in the UK are still scared to share. I've been made unemployed more times than I'd care to disclose because of diabetes stigma, and because I started speaking up and trying to employ my rights when faced with this. There are still loopholes that employers can use to discriminate. So there is so much that we are facing here. Stigma is a huge, huge issue. It is so complex. But we have a question down the back.
Thank you. Anna Morris from the charity Diabetes UK. Thanks to the panel. So my question is about stigma again, and you've just touched on it to a degree. I wondered if you had any comment about intra-community stigma within the diabetes community, and what you think we as a community, the charities, others could be doing to help address that. Because one of the things that we find is when we do work to understand people's perspectives of living with diabetes, quite often people don't feel comfortable raising their voice through social media, and some of that comes from that kind of perceived intra-community stigma. Thank you.
Is that, sorry, can I just ask you a question? Is it when you're saying people, when you struggle to find people, is it people with all types of diabetes, or is it certain types of diabetes that people are more likely to not want to perhaps be a spokesperson?
Yeah, so with type 2 diabetes particularly.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. But I'm really keen to hear what people... Did you want to say something, Bastian?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that many of the diabetes advocacy and peer support organizations are starting to ask themselves quite self-critically now whether we've done something wrong in the past. The type 1 community is very outspoken these days and very strong. but we might at some points not always have done it all right. And there are strong currents within the type 1 community that are not necessarily very friendly towards the type 2 community, because there is this need of trying to say, this is not us, or this perceived need of saying, this is not my kind of diabetes. And that is in part due to the stigma that is around in society, because there is this perception that type 2 is something that is brought upon you by your own fault. Then the type 1 say, but this is not me, this is genetic, this is not, and that of course doesn't help. With dedoc, we have tried from the very, very beginning to not fall into that trap, although certainly this did happen as well, so I'm not trying to excuse anything. What we have, however, found being very efficient and effective, because we have the same situation in the dedoc community, that it is to a much larger degree type 1 than type 2, and we're really, really hard. We're trying hard to change that, to get more and more type 2 voices and other diabetes types to be part of that community, but it is hard. Everybody who works in this space, trying to get the voice of people living with type 2, knows it is a completely different ballgame because of everything we've been discussing. What we have been doing quite successfully in campaigns in the past is use the power of the type 1 community to advocate on behalf of our friends with type 2. And that can actually unleash a lot of good. And I think this is what we have to strive for more, to be united and to make this. There's now certain hashtags that are being created that make that even stronger. And I think we will see a lot more of that coming forward.
Yeah, would any of our panellists like to add to this? Because I think this is a recurring conversation in the community. I will say, as somebody who for a very long time was a spokesperson with a diabetes organisation, that changing the way that we even defined type 1 and type 2 diabetes when we were asked, you know, I was really committed to that, because saying people with type 1 diabetes, type 1 diabetes can't be prevented, already starts to frame type 2 diabetes as that, oh, those people, they could have prevented this, when it's not a simple equation. So changing the way that we would define the types of diabetes when we were asked that simple question into a sound bite that the Channel 6 News would still play in their news bulletin was something that was really important to craft to get that message out, because otherwise every single time we were asked to define the different types of diabetes, we were inadvertently contributing to diabetes stigma.
Thank you so much.
Anything to add here before? No?
I feel the eyes are kind of...
Go.
So,
To me, it's just kind of one thing, simple thing to think about is when it comes to that, the sad part of it is people bring their personalities to the condition. We're still dealing with human beings here, and we all know human beings are flawed. So they bring their flaws to the condition, and this is what causes a lot of that, what I like to call infighting, in a sense, in the separation. But I think we just have to keep pushing the narrative and gain control of the narrative and squash them on the sidelines, you know.
Sure, I've got a lot to say on the subject, but I'll keep it brief. So, you know, there's something about like imposter syndrome, because I think that one must acknowledge that type 1 community, even if we speak about industry and pharma, it feels like there is, certainly from my perception, a organized and channeled approach towards type 1 diabetes. And so when I've been engaging, especially over the last 2 years, it's almost felt my internal voice would tell me, well, actually, you know what? My colleague, my friend who's got type 1 diabetes takes precedent over me. Number one. So even in this space, I've needed to get my own personal head around that I have got agency to be here speaking to you today. I didn't feel that. So I think there's this collective consciousness that needs to be dealt with. And I think that is very much linked to stakeholder engagement, the private sector, legislation, community, NGO spaces. And I think that's about how does one approach that in various avenues. We spoke about employment, and it's one of the areas I'm quite passionate about. So in terms of South African contextual legislation, I would like to see that we amend legislation, especially around employment equity, that addresses. So we speak about sex discrimination, gender discrimination, but you know, we've got HIV that we refer to in our legislation, and I'd like to see diabetes articulated. We do have papers on it, but particularly in things like our legislation doesn't make provisions around, so when someone is in the environment, not to be discriminated against. You don't have to disclose if you're living with diabetes or not, as is any other condition. But it's this submissiveness that happens within contexts of the work environment, where the discrimination happens, exclusivity happens, that needs to be addressed. So that's just one avenue. So I think it's complex, and I don't think it's one thing. And I think culture is another big aspect that would need to be dealt with. And I think those things are all leveraged via things like marketing and media and communication and branding. And what are those messaging? And so how are these stakeholders held accountable and are responsible for what they are, what is being reflected? Yeah.
Wonderful. We've got lots of questions, and I'm so sorry. I will apologise and say that I don't know the order. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, and then back there 4. So Elizabeth, you can go first.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Sorry, I know I was not the first one.
Oh,
but
I'm
still
sorry,
I take
Lion.
my chance.
Okay.
So thank you very much for all the presentations, the excellent discussion that we are currently having. I'm Elizabeth from IDF Europe, and I have a specific question to Helga. You mentioned the importance of peer-to-peer support, and that this is something that helped you. We know that in Europe, peer-to-peer support for people living with type 2 diabetes is not well developed yet, and there is a huge need for that. So would you have any tips or advices on how you manage to go about it and how this could be further developed? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. I think that there's an opportunity, not only, well, it's a conversation we're having currently in South Africa around peer support. Education is really important. And I think there are a couple of aspects of it. One would be around, when we're talking peer support, and I can tell you again from a lived experience, I'm currently not a medical, of course not in the medical profession. I am not a health practitioner. And so this excludes me from getting certain certifications in order to support my peer. I can only speak in my own context. And so I think there's an opportunity for providing education, training, facilitation within communities that doesn't necessarily require medical requirements or qualifications in order to do diabetes care and support. And I think there's an opportunity for that to be developed. So for peer-to-peer support, because I think these need to be in safe spaces and creating that support. And I think that there's an opportunity, again, to piggyback off existing community-based programs in order to enter communities in a particular safe way and to have those discussions particularly. So I think there's an opportunity for one to be certified, and I think it's important. There needs to be, people want to be dealt with around credibility, and so having certification or qualifications really important. Yeah, I don't know if that addresses it in any way for you.
It's certainly a very good start, and I look forward to discuss it further with you. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Lion, your turn.
My name is Osayenhoy Ethel Chimawogugu from Nigeria. EndDiabetesStigma alumni, that's advocates with EndDiabetesStigma, and also a member of the Blue Circle Voices initiative of IDF. I want to share my story as a gestational mother, then, now type 2. It's a short story, and then I'll relate it to the challenges we are having, because I've been listening to everyone's stigma is quite different from what most of what I experienced. I'm still experiencing. A little of it Helga shared, because she's from the other side of Africa. As a pregnant young mom, when I was diagnosed with gestational is considered, nobody even knew about gestational at the time, which is 23 years ago. Nobody knew what gestational, it was not being talked about. Only the doctors know. My mother and my father had diabetes, and they died from it before I even got pregnant. So I didn't know. I only knew type 2 diabetes. We didn't know anything about type 1 diabetes. So the stigma was, when I got pregnant, I was told I have gestational, new word. People around me don't know. Sugar in your blood. The first thing is you're eating too much. And that's what I was told, I'm eating too much. Not the doctor. Everybody around me says you're eating too much. So no, you don't need to eat. You don't need to do this. I'm pregnant. So those are stigma, and it's still going on. Even some of the doctors still tell you, healthcare providers still tell you, teen date, not minding that research has shown that it's not your fault, it's not a woman's fault, it's a condition of the body. I had to go through that because I had beautiful 5 daughters. And I had to become an advocate. When I went through the first episode of such discrimination, I looked at it and said, well, many women are suffering from this. There was a day I was at a clinic, and I saw a man quarreling with the wife. I told you, don't drink mineral, don't eat this, you won't listen, you just eat. Now you have diabetes. I had to sit them down and advise him and told him, look, I'm living with it. I just had my beautiful baby, and I'm pregnant with the second one. Your wife is not her fault. And you could see the man like, are you sure? I said, it's not her fault. And she was already feeling depressed. And you can imagine going through such discrimination, and then you have to still go through with what pregnancy brings upon you.
Lion, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It's just we've got 2 more questions and we are down to under 10 minutes. So you've got 1 more minute, and then we're going to have to move on. Thank you.
So just to bring to our attention that back there in Africa, in Nigeria, stigma is induced by culture, induced by religion, and is also, like she said, inequality. You're a woman, and a man, whatever a man says, is what happened. And for the fact that we are women and we are built big, you are blamed, everything is you. So like, I just want to say that as we are discussing this, the stigma we're talking about here, over there is different. Like, we already are agreeing to move it forward. Let's get view of how a kind of stigma is over there, like I'm bringing it now. And let's harmonize it. Because stigma, what you're calling stigma there, is some people's culture in Nigeria. It's their normal life. So it's going to be something you need to, I think in the presentation that was done by the Japanese in the presentation, she asked us to really think about it.
Absolutely.
So I think it's important.
So thank you so much. So I think, though, that is a really important point, which is that there is no one-size-fits-all, this is what stigma is. We need to consider different cultural considerations, personal considerations, types of diabetes considerations. It is a super complex issue, which is why we need to keep having these conversations. Yes, hello.
Hello, great job to everyone. Phil Sutherland, CEO of Super Sapiens, Diabetes, CEO of Super Sapiens, or excuse me, Team Novo Nordisk also. So I'd like to give credit to what's been done so far. You know, like when Team Novo Nordisk was started, 6 of, and it's to the doctor who asked, what can a physician do? 12 of the 18 athletes were told you'll never race a bike again when they were diagnosed with type 1. You know, Talent ID camps we have now, 25 of 25 kids this summer, when they were diagnosed, said, go look at all the champions out there with diabetes. You can do what you want with control. So I think for the physician community, it's very important when someone's diagnosed, you tell them you can do whatever you want, but you have to take control, right? And then pivoting over to Bastian, what you brought up a very good point about the divide between type 1 and type 2. And that divide is real. And I think we have to solve for that. And I think the youth, and especially dedoc, has a powerful voice in doing so. And thinking about the chapters that you set up, I'm just kind of curious of, dedoc France, how can we get a type 1 and a type 2 to both say we have diabetes, right? Because if you look at the type 2 as a bigger population, right? So you look at our voting power in elections and things of that nature as we look to solve access challenges. If we're unified, we will be able to achieve so much more from a political perspective. So how, Bastian, do you intend for dedoc to really be the youth driving the change to bring these two divided communities together? And I think you highlighted on some tactics that are being done, but more specifically, what do we need to do to unify type 1 and type 2 and really have a much more powerful voice at the voting polls, because that's where access to all the tools that we all need is really going to be solved for.
Bastian, that's for you. But I'm
very short.
You've got 2 minutes,
I mean, look,
mate.
I think not everything is diabetes and stigma, and not always is it 100% necessary to have everybody in one boat. But for a number of things, that makes a lot of sense. What we're trying to do with dedoc is to be very aware of the possible, let's say, side effects when we talk only type 1 or only type 2. And most of the time we find that it is not necessary. We do at the same time recognize that for some it is important to say, I want to talk about type 2. Because in some degrees and in some real life that is different. And we also recognize that some say, for me it is important to now have a deep dive on something that is very specific, type 1, and I want to... So there is no one-size-fits-all recipe, as always. But I think what is important, and this is something that I think we have done quite well, is that whenever we do either type 1 or type 2 or gestational, we try to at least think about it holistically at the very beginning and see whether what we may be doing when we dive deep here or there, whether that may have side effects or consequences that are most of the time unintended, but nonetheless there. I think I'll keep it at that, because otherwise we'll talk forever.
But I will also just add to that, Phil, if I can, that dedoc is open to everybody. So it is an open forum. The dedoc Voices program, which is being showcased here, is only one part of it. There are doc days, there are other opportunities for people to be elevated and for their voices to be heard. So sharing about dedoc and asking people to get connected is super, super important. But yes, absolutely, trying to unite the community in any way we possibly can is always important. But thanks so much.
Maybe just one more number. So the dedoc community, it's 200 plus advocates from more than 50 countries from around the world. And out of those, a little bit more than 80% are type 1.
Yeah.
Now you could say that's too much, right? That is 80% out of, but at least it also says that almost 20% is not. So there's type 2s, there's LADAs, there's MODIs, there's caregivers as well. So we're getting there. And like I said in the very beginning, what we often do is, as we have this very strong type 1 component, we try and look for ways in which we can use that to work with the other communities as one. And that has worked wonders.
Yep. What I think y'all are doing a phenomenal job. And I think the type 1s, we've come so far in the past 20 years, right, from a awareness and advocacy standpoint. I really feel we have a responsibility to really bring in the type 2 community and show them the power of advocacy, show them the power, what you said about only telling 5 people, that had to be so brutal, right? And I know there's a lot more people like you. So if we can show the power of being open about it, by really making a focused effort to bring more type 2s, like in my job, I'm trying to do the same, right? So it's not easy. But if we do that, especially with the youth, and have the youth embracing type 2s earlier, I just think we can have a great impact. So bravo to dedoc, y'all rock.
Thank you.
Love what you do.
But I do want to just say we've got a comment here from one of our dedoc voices, Eileen, thank you. dedoc is not just youth, thank you. Type 1 community focusing on youth only is another stigma outcome, in my humble opinion. That's absolutely something to think about. Thank you for that comment. Jane, you're next.
Thanks, Renza. Jane Spate from the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes. I should also say I'm part of the panel that's put together the pledge to end diabetes stigma. It's more of a comment than a question, just to bring it to this forum, and in the spirit of what we wish you knew and why, is to respond to Anna's comment from Diabetes UK about how do we encourage more people with type 2 to speak up. I think we have to be really aware that we've had probably more than 20 years now of awareness-raising campaigns that have come from diabetes organisations that tell the community the broader general public that these people have brought diabetes on themselves, and it's their fault, they're to blame, and they don't deserve our sympathy or support. And I think we've definitely seen some more impressive and powerful and supportive campaigns in more recent years. But I suspect that to people living with that condition, that feels like it could just be a blip. It could just be a nice bit of luck that that campaign was quite good last year, and they still don't feel safe in this space of the wider community and coming out and speaking up. And even when they do, the newspapers want to turn that headline into something shocking and impactful and cutting through and all of that kind of stuff. So basically my message here is that we all, whether it's a diabetes organisation, I work for a diabetes organisation as well, so I'm part of this, we all need to hold the mirror up to our past campaigns, our past resources. It's not just diabetes organisations, it's industry, it's all the stuff in the exhibition hall. There's a whole load of stuff in there that's not particularly well phrased and can be quite blaming of people. And we still need to keep banging on about language matters, because it really does. And, until we see that expo hall, that you could walk around it and not feel stigmatized at all, then we haven't done our job and we haven't finished. So I think we do need to hold the mirror up to every piece of resource that we've got in our organizations and say, what about this could be stigmatizing? Go out to people with diabetes and ask them what might be the unintended consequences of this messaging that we're putting out, whether it's imagery or words. And we need to do that with everything we've got. And it sounds like a huge job, and actually it is, but we need to start somewhere. And I think that's what taking the pledge is about. It's about identifying that this is a problem, and we draw a line in the sand and say, okay, from this day on, we're going to be doing much more about this. But it's not going to be a quick fix. But I think that's how we create the safe space for people with type 2 to actually come forward and talk about this.
Thanks, Jane. And I'm so sorry, we haven't got time because we are going to get kicked out, but come and talk to us. I will also say co-design is a beautiful thing. If you don't want to have to fix some lousy stigmatising images or languages or campaigns when you're about to press the launch button or after you've launched them, co-design them with people with diabetes, because we'll tell you. It's a really good idea to do that soon. Did you want to do a wrap-up, Bastian? Yes. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go sit down.
I'm not going to do a wrap-up, don't worry. I would just simply like to say thank you all for coming. I know there were one or two that still had questions. Please come forward, talk to everybody here on the panel, come join us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for EASD for having us. And I want to give one completely unrelated last shout out to one specific dedoc voice who was supposed to be here throughout the conference and couldn't make it, and that is Jerome. He is a type 2 refugee from Rwanda living in Burundi. He does some amazing advocacy work out there, and he got denied his visa. He cannot be here today. He is just sending pictures of himself sitting down there on his laptop, following the dedoc symposium live, sending questions and comments. Jerome, I'm very sorry we couldn't bring you in. We'll try to do earlier this year, try to get your visa. I know it's hard. Thank you for joining virtually. Thank you everyone for joining virtually, but I did have to say that. Thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of EASD. This was dedoc. This was the dedoc symposium. See you next year.